All right, what's up, everybody? So, had some interesting changes in the Ureli Prime patch today. I just wanted to bring up. So, it's a couple small line items in the general changes section, but potentially they could have a pretty big impact to a relatively low play rate frame. So, I'm referring to the changes made to Avara, specifically her concentrated arrow augment. So this is an augment that I used to love. I used to play with Avara with this augment all the time. Unfortunately, it kind of got to a point where like it didn't really feel worth using. It kind of just felt better to use Avara and just like use a better weapon because her bow was like kind of bad. Um, so they did make some changes. So now you get 50% crit chance on a fully charged shot, additional 50% crit chance on weak point hits. That's like kind of, I mean, more crit chance is really nice, obviously. Adding a line of sight check, like some people were making a big deal that this was gonna like break the ability, but like frankly, the ability it kind of sucked before. If I'm gonna be completely honest, I mean it was like playable, but it really only had one viable build, which I'll go into. So now I don't think that's really that big of a problem. Plenty of Warframes have line of sight checks. That's kind of just a standard thing at this point. What the big item is this. AoE Explosion now applies status effects with a 20% base chance. Now that's not the craziest base status chance, one might say to themselves. So let's look at what the old version of Concentrated Arrow did. So before, you had 0% status chance, but you did have a forced impact proc. So you could not proc other statuses with Concentrated Arrow. So let's jump in game and we can look at Concentrated Arrow here. Okay, so now this does add some positives and some negatives. So I was kind of messing around with the mods. I don't know if this would be like the ideal mod setup for this. You can kind of like, do whatever you want. I do personally think if you're going to run a concentrated arrow build, Ensnare is highly advisable because it holds enemies still, so it lets you actually hit the headshots. And then of course it groups enemies to, so they can get hit by the explosion. I will say one weird inconsistency that I noticed right away is that they changed the wording and the functionality for concentrated arrow to synergize with weak point hits rather than headshots, but Prowl still does bonus damage to headshots, not weak point hits. Now, as you can see, my strength is really low because I'm running overextended, but my actual Artemis bow strength is much higher because I'm running Precision Intensify, and on top of that, I also have Arcane Crepuscular, which is adding a little bit of extra strength and that extra final critical damage multiplier, which synergizes really nicely with Concentrated Arrow. Now, I don't have a companion, but whatever companion you go for, I think if it can apply viral, and if it can have the two bond effects, so reinforced bond for the extra fire rate, which I'll get into why in a second, and then the other one, which I guess I could just look at it on this one. I think it is Tenacious. Yeah. So if you have a companion that can take advantage of both Reinforced Bond and Tenacious Bond, and ideally apply Viral, that's really nice too. That's probably what you want to go for. So obviously with the extra crit from the augment change, crit damage multiplier becomes even better. And then on top of that, you also have the fire rate increase. So before previous, I mean, it still kind of works like this. So one of the interesting things about Artemis Bow, so you'll see here, the damage from a quick shot or a charge shot is the exact same. So before, how you would play Avara is you would like go into your Artemis bow, and then you would just like, you know, tap. You would tap shoot because it didn't matter if you had a fully charged shot or not. So I would actually just run no fire rate mods on Avara on her bow before because it didn't matter. Now you're going more for the AoE damage, so I actually took Galvanized Aptitude off. I added Vile Acceleration instead to offset critical delay, and you also get a ton of flat damage from Spectral Serration. And because they added that ability to crit on her AoE, now she can really take advantage of Primary Crux, which is a very powerful primary arcane. Before, you couldn't combine Primary Crux and her concentrated arrow because it just didn't work. Now it can. So that 20% base status chance can become a lot higher with Primary Crux. So the rest of this is like pretty standard. You have like, you know, Rifle Elementalist, you have multi-shot, your base damage, fire rate, crit and crit damage. Now the crit and crit damage are worth even more with the augment. So I ended up going with Heat. I think probably the second best status is maybe Blast. The problem I had with Blast is that like with the 20% status chance, because you're firing like your fire rate is not very high with this build. So you can't like stack up to 10 stacks of Blast on an enemy like all that quickly. So you kind of have to wait for the blast timer to expire for it to go off. And it just felt really slow. It was good. It just felt kind of slow, that's all. And it also, because there's that quadratic scaling with blast hitting multiple enemies that are all affected by blast and boom, big explosion, it falls off really hard against single targets. So I personally will be running this with Heat because, you know, it's doesn't matter how many targets you're hitting. I also did try like electric and gas. Those just suffered too much from armor personally. I don't think it was as effective as electric or as Heat. So I think Heat is like the best all-around option. You could definitely experiment with other elemental effects. DE, please add Primed Hellfire. Like, please. I would like, my life is yours if you give us Primed Hellfire. Like, that would be amazing. Please. TennoCon, announce Primed Hellfire. Everybody goes crazy. You sell 13 million copies of Valkyr Heirlooms ass. Like, you're so happy. We're happy. Everybody's happy. Give us Primed Heirloom. Okay. Or give us Primed Hellfire. So, let's see, you know, how this works. So you always want to go into stealth. Well, let me summon some enemies. You always want to go into stealth first because of Arcane Crepuscular or whatever the hell you call it. So, you know, I mean, this you don't actually really like have to group enemies with this. So that's a quick tap. So you saw it was mostly, you know, yellow crits. But even with like none of the galvanized mods stacked up, like that was like decent damage, you know. So you really want to fully draw it, and it's like mostly orange crits, like half and half, a lot more orange crits. So, you know, then, you know, you're starting to get some more heat procs because my primary crux is stacking up. Now, this does, it is a little slow to get off the ground. Like, you know, your first couple shots are going to be, you know, you're not going to have primary crux stacked up. You're not going to have your galvanized mods stacked up. So, like, you know, just be aware of that. When you go into a mission and you initially shoot this, shoot it at some fodder enemies first. Now, we can use Ensnare, which, as I mentioned, one, it holds the target you're going to shoot at in place, and two, it groups enemies up. So this, you know, the explosion from this follows similar rules as other explosive weapons. It falls off over time. So now, I don't have a ton of stacks of primary crux, but, you know, pretty solid status damage. You know, now my stuff's all stacked up, so got primary crux all stacked up. Let me try and summon enemies back before my primary crux runs out. I don't know if I would be able to do that. Yeah, okay, so that was like with primary crux stacked up, but I was not in stealth. So, but I mean, pretty solid damage. And the best part is this damage can scale really well. And one thing that hit concentrated arrow pretty hard was there was a build that was serviceable for this before, because you could abuse internal bleeding. And so, as I mentioned, as we looked on the old wiki article, her old concentrated arrow had no status chance, but it did have a guaranteed impact proc. So you could abuse internal bleeding. You could also use hunter munitions if you wanted. And this would you'd almost like guaranteed get multiple slash procs on like a group of enemies. Now, what's the problem with that? The problem is that slash is kind of bad now. Like, it's not like bad, but it's not nearly as good as the elemental status effects, I feel like, because they did that rebalancing where armor is less impactful, but they increased enemy health. So what its status, or what it's like, the reason slash was good is because it got past Grineer armor, and Corpus just didn't have that much health anyways. But now that Corpus has a more health and shields, and Grineer have more health, and armor is less impactful, slash just isn't as good. And the thing that buffed slash so much, which is viral, also works with the heat. So another thing we can show really quick is so on my epitaph I have like a just like a status primer build. Let me see here. I literally just want viral. I don't want anything else. So let me just do this really quick, just so you know. Now, one thing, I don't have galvanized aptitude, so I don't have like gundition overload on my bow because it doesn't work with AoE effects. So go in here. So this is kind of like if you really want to get crazy with scaling, you would epitaph to get a bunch of viral procs. This is why I'm definitely going to be running a hound with viral. So now they have a bunch of viral stacks and cold, and yeah, they're going to take like a truck ton of damage. So, you know, those heat procs are going to hit really hard with all those viral stacks. So, you know, overall, I'm actually like, you know, I think this is pretty cool. I saw some people that were concerned that this might be like an overall nerf to concentrated arrow. Personally, I feel like this is going to make concentrated arrow a lot better, like potentially way more usable in the current meta, where for primaries you basically either have like insane upfront damage. Some still rely on like hunter munitions, but that's way less powerful now. And then the really insane primaries can abuse primary crux a lot, and like you just get some stupid heat numbers. It's just unbelievable. So yeah, looking forward to trying this a lot more. Like I said, I do think I personally think you should run a grouping ability. I think Ensnare is by far the best option for this build. Another thing, you could also mess around with some of her augments, like her Dashwire augment. I'm just like, I don't usually run that because, like, I mean, that's just not really how Warframe works anymore. You're rarely just sitting in one spot not doing anything, so I don't use that as much as I used to. But give Avara another shot. I think that the build, and I'll just pull it up one more time before I go. I think that this build for her bow and this build for Avara herself could be pretty good. So, you know, give it a shot and let me know how it goes. And as always, thanks for watching. See ya.